Welcome to the guide, Exile. In this guide we will be exploring the finer details of resistances and the importance of maximum resistance as well as resistance penetration. As a heads up, there will be many numbers and functions, so viewer beware. Damage in Path of Exile can occur in three main types: Chaos, Elemental, and Physical. Elemental damage types include Cold, Fire, and Lightning. Of these three main types, you will be able to gain resistance to Elemental and Chaos damage, which provide a flat reduction to those damages. Resistances are the sole method for consistent mitigation of Elemental and Chaos damage types, aside from avoidance defenses like Dodge or Evasion, or Chaos Inoculation for Chaos damage, and due to this, they are very important. Your resistances can be seen on your character sheet under the Defenses section. There will be an affiliated resistance name, followed by two percentage values. The first percentage value is your active resistance value, and the second percentage value in the parenthesis are your uncapped resistances. Active resistance is the total resistance of that type that you have from items or passives, up to the default cap of 75%. This is the value that will be used to calculate your mitigation against that damage type. The 75% cap can be raised by flasks, passive points, auras, or unique items, providing powerful increases to your resistance mitigation. If you encounter zones that have the affix minus maximum elemental resistances, this is the number that will be reduced. If you are attacked by a monster that has resistance penetration, this is the number that will be reduced. Uncapped resistance is the total resistance of that type that you have from items and/or passives without a cap. Items that scale from uncapped resistances, such as the Formless Inferno or Choir of the Storm, scale other stats from your uncapped resistance, making this a valuable stat to invest in even after the 75% default cap. If you encounter zones that have the affix players are cursed with elemental weakness, or if you are cursed by an enemy with any elemental curse, this is the number that will be reduced. Damage taken after resistances is calculated in the following manner. As we can see, it is a linear function, so we aren't affected by diminishing returns. Resistance is obtained from implicit and explicit properties on gear, flasks, passive points, and/or auras. It is a necessity to be capped at the default 75% to all resistances for endgame content, aside from chaos resistance. Now that we have a handle on what resistances are and how they work, let's explore the importance of maximum resistance and penetration investments. As mentioned previously, you will have a default 75% cap on your resistances. However, it can be increased to a much higher percentages with the correct investments. If we take a look at the graph of resistance damage mitigation, we can see that we only gain linear reduction per point investment. But if we take a closer look, we can see that each point invested is actually more valuable than the last point, with each point becoming more effective than the last. Let us take a look at an example here. Say that a monster hits us for 1000 fire damage for the following examples, and initially we have a 75% fire resistance. We would then take the following amount of damage. Now let's say that we gained +1 to maximum fire resistance, resulting in a 76% fire resistance. We would then take the following amount of damage. We reduce the incoming damage by 1/25, or 4%, by just increasing our maximum fire resistance by 1 percentage point. This means that each 1 percentage point of resistance at 75% maximum resistance provides a point value of 4%. If we invest 1% more to maximum fire resistance, we will then have 77% fire resistance. We would then take the following damage. We now reduced our damage by 1/24, or 4.2%. As we can see, as we invest more into our maximum resistance, each percentage point reduces more damage relatively than the last. Each point will reduce the following. As we can see here, we have a rational function which grows rapidly as we move towards 100% resistance, as we are reducing the denominator. If we extrapolate this all the way up to 99% fire resistance, we can see that we reduce damage taken by 100% with one more percentage point to maximum fire resistance. From this, we can conclude that each point of maximum fire resistance gained is very powerful and becomes more and more efficient as you gain more. So be on the lookout to get maximum resistance whenever possible. Resistance penetration is another mechanic that is commonly misunderstood and a very worthwhile investment for pure elemental builds. In essence, resistance penetration will reduce your or a monster's active resistance before the damage reduction calculation. There is no floor on this reduction, and resistances can be reduced to negative values. Penetration ultimately acts as a more multiplier for your damage, but investing too much into penetration can be inefficient depending on the other options you may have available for scaling your damage. Let us take a look at the effectiveness of 10% resistance penetration over different resistance values. As we can see, we have another rational function similar to the maximum resistances function, which provides you with the most effectiveness against high resistances. As we know, the lower the resistance value, the less each point of resistance is worth. So the more that you reduce it, the less that it will return per point invested. Basically the flip side of maximum resistance investment. In general, when you're a pure elemental build, you will always want to invest some sort of resistance penetration for your respective element. It is just a matter of how much is worth it over other damage increases. If we take a look at an example, we can better understand when the investment into resistance penetration can be beaten by a different investment. For this example, we are mainly investigating the value of using a resistance penetration support gem over a support gem that provides another more multiplier. We will also assume that the monsters that we are dealing damage against are not overcapped on elemental resistances. Say that we have the skill Fireball, which deals 1000 base fire damage, and we have a 6 link to support it. We now have to choose what support gems to add to gain the most damage. Say we are ignoring secondary damage as well as efficient mechanics for clearing for the sake of this example, and just want to look at how to maximize our upfront damage with as many multipliers as we can. So we choose the following: Controlled Destruction, Elemental Focus, Concentrated Effect, Fire Penetration, and Empower. Say that we also add in that we are using the Flammability Curse to further reduce the monster's fire resistance by 44%, again assuming that we are fighting monsters without overcapped fire resistance and no reduced curse effectiveness. The damage for this is calculated with the following equation. As we can see in the formula, the resistance penetrations are added together, much like increased modifiers. As expected, the graph of this function shows that we have a linear increase as the monster's resistance is lower. But what if we swap our fire penetration support gem for another more multiplier gem, slower projectiles? We now have the following equation. As we can see, these functions intersect at 16% fire resistance. If you are fighting monsters with more than 16 fire resistance, the setup with fire penetration will do more damage. But if they have less than 16% fire resistance, you will do more damage swapping the penetration gem for the slower projectile support gem. In general, most monsters have low elemental resistances aside from bosses. More specifically, monster resistances can be checked on PoEDB as well as the PoE Wiki page. These will be linked in the description below. Looking into this further, we can see that there are many other options for obtaining resistance penetration than just the support gem. We can gather penetration from the passive tree and other items such as the Wise Oak Bismuth Flask, which provides 20% elemental penetration for your highest uncapped resistance. In this case, if we have our fire resistance as our highest uncapped resistance, we can gain 20% fire penetration when this flask is in use. If we add this to our original function with fire penetration, we now have the following equation. If we now drop our fire penetration support gem for slower projectiles gem, we now have the following equation. Looking at the graph, we can see that these two functions intersect at 36% fire penetration, making the fire penetration gem hold less value against general non-boss monsters. However, once you get to endgame scenarios and are in maps with large amounts of elemental resistance, and are fighting bosses with elemental resistance and reduced curse effectiveness, pure penetration will hold its value much better. So don't skimp out on penetration, but be aware of other support options that may provide you better damage effectiveness if you already have decent penetration investment. So Exiles, I hope you've learned a thing or two about resistances, why they are important, and their somewhat hidden mechanics without being way too confused. If you did get lost in it all, just remember that resistances are very powerful and should not be underestimated. Make sure to look out for maximum resistances, as well as getting penetration if you are a pure elemental build for your respective element. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, Exiles.